Thanks everyone for being here. I'm really excited to be here as well. My name is Vejay Lalla. I'm a technology transactions partner at Fenwick in the New York office and co-lead of our digital media entertainment and consumer tech practice. I'm joined by my colleague and co-moderator, Jennifer Stanley, who's the co-head of the technology transactions practice at Fenwick and co-lead of our gaming practice, and three great paralegal and founders who are really, like I said, in the trenches of building AI companies. And we're really excited to talk to you about what you're doing today. While machine learning is certainly not new, when we think about enterprise, the rapid pace of integration of AI tools is something we haven't seen, combining machine learning with cognitive and deep learning functions. When, as a lawyer, I look at this, and I'm spent a lot of time on the advertising side looking at sort of regulations in the FTC. They've been questioning whether or not companies should really develop AI at all, engaging in AI development that they're advertising, and whether the outcomes to consumers are harmful or deceptive, including in the entertainment media space, deep fakes, voice clones, and other areas. So lots of interesting regulatory framework, but consumers are obviously going to continue to engage with content, media, game products that are innovative. And as we just heard from Maritz, if you're not developing those products with AI in mind, you're probably not going to have a very successful product. Yet they also sort of look for authenticity and transparency when you think about end consumers. And so with that backdrop, I'd love to have a deeper business discussion today. And we're going to kind of talk about a few different areas, both in terms of business to business enterprise adoption of AI, as well as consumer adoption, and then some of the surrounding IP, regulatory, and sort of development issues that you all are facing. So with that, I'd love to jump in. And my first question is easy because I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves and then tell us a little bit about your company and how you're using AI in the media and entertainment space. And then we'll dive a little bit more into detail about those issues. But I'll start with Omar. If you could start, that would be great, and then we'll go to Kostas and Chris for to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your business.
Thank you, Vijay. I'm honored to be here. My name's Omar Tawakol. I'm the CEO of a company called Rembrand. And a while back, I started a company called BlueKai, which was a data marketplace and a data management platform that Oracle acquired, and it became the Oracle Data Cloud. And it served 97 of the top 100 advertisers. So it hit quite an interesting scale. After I ran that for a while, I built another company, but it was an AI company outside of marketing. It was conversational intelligence. Cisco ended up acquiring that, and it became the engine that does closed captions, transcriptions, and pen detection for WebEx, for Cisco phones, for contact center products. And so now I started just recently a company called Rembrand, which is almost the child of those two companies. It is a pure AI company using generative AI techniques to do product placement. But it's also in the marketing industry back in my roots. So it's a lot of fun. And what we're doing is we're disrupting the ad industry, which has relied on interruptive ads for too long. People hate interruptive ads. We're spending all this time in video, but people pay money to avoid those interruptive ads. So instead, what we're doing is essentially an AdSense for virtual product placement. So you can put products inside post-production videos without interrupting the story in a way that funds content creation and gives value for advertisers. So that's a quick intro, maybe not so quick.
Awesome. I'll go next. I'm Kostas, CEO and founder of GoCharlie. My quick background, I've been a lifelong AI researcher, postdoc, PhD, master's, couple ambassadors. I've spent the last 10 years studying a lot of the stuff that's going viral right now, basically from cognitive systems and deep learning and generative models. And that's where I formed the company along with some other AI scientists, where we focus very heavily on helping content creators and marketers to create content of all type, especially like multimedia type content, from blogs to videos to tweets and so forth. And what we're heading right now is more towards agent-based tasks, where I guess the last 2-3 years with the rise of GPT-3, and we're all familiar with that, is you could use it to create one piece of content at a time, and you had to heavily prompt it and use multiple tools to kind of edit everything to get your final version. Now, we're heading into a future where you simply, in plain English, tell the AI, look, study my business, study my brand voice, and make me several blogs, several tweets, several memes, make me a video, make me a whole campaign's worth of content, and get pretty close to a final draft as well. And boom, in a few seconds, the AI understood the task that I have to call multiple tools in the back end, create multiple pieces of content, score them, and get the final drafts back to the user. And that's where we're really heading, both as in our company, and that's where I think the industry's heading altogether, where we're going to start asking the AIs to run multiple complex tasks, whether it's going to be from content creation to create different media, even running our software for us. We could say like, hey, make me a tweet, now post it, now reply to everyone who comments on it, for instance. And that's a scary, but also very exciting future. That's my background. Chris?
Hi, I'm Christopher. I'm the CEO and co-founder of GlobalComix. GlobalComix is a community marketplace and ecosystem for comic creators that work with sequential art, comic books, graphic novels, webcomics, webtoons, these types of things. And over the last, I'd say 15 years, I've been deep in this idea of community and ecosystems and building creative economies. And as we find ourselves today at this kind of precipice of having AI be able to come in and really play a significant role inside of these ecosystems, that's the approach that we're taking to integrating AI for GlobalComix, right? Starting with things like process optimization all the way through to being able to create completely new media forms or formats that didn't exist before. An example would be infinitely zooming into something and kind of going into a different world, etc.
That's great. And now I'm even more excited to have this conversation. So Chris, let's start with you. You think about sort of, as I mentioned earlier, sort of, we're going to see a lot of adoption generally in the marketplace. As Moritz mentioned, with NPCs, you're going to see more, gaming companies sort of, create products that people want to engage with. But let's talk a little bit about enterprise adoption, right? Businesses are not as quick, or people who are using tools from a business perspective, not always as quick to adopt things as others are. Lots of considerations to think about. Even if you think about it at a high level, you think about sort of, okay, I'm using ChatGPT and I have confidential information that I may have to worry about in that context, or you've seen leaks. In the creator world that you're in the platform that you enable for creators, what is the sort of reaction that you're getting to the potential for AI use? I mean, obviously it could be a game changer on some level in terms of the amount of output that can be created. But what are you seeing? So sort of overall reaction, interaction you're having with sort of your, what I would call quote unquote customer?
It's kind of, they fall into two buckets, right? And kind of rightfully so. There's this group of folks that are very, very worried about ethics and morality and whether or not, models have been trained on things with consent. And that plays a huge role for our creator community. And then you have, on the other side, very often an overlap of the same people that say, well, it might take me 90 hours a week to get this webcomic produced on a weekly basis. If I could reduce that down to 25 hours and have a better work-life balance, I'd be all for that, right? And so the way that we're kind of baby stepping our way into it is really about being creator first with the technologies and with the conversations with our constituents. When you're creating comics and art in general, there's usually a lot of different steps, right? Like, so in comics, for example, there's a penciling, and then there's an inking, and there's a lettering, and there's all these things that take a lot of time. And I think initially one of the first places to kind of look at for our creative community is, how do we reduce the amount of time that they spend so that they can do more of what they actually really like, right? And then, beyond that, it's also a question of how can we use AI technologies to help these creators run a business or to make money in different ways that they couldn't do before, right? So the constructs of royalty tracking and use tracking and kind of being able to understand what went into generative piece of art is also really, really important for our community.
I think that's a great answer. I think it pulls on a lot of threads we're going to talk about through this panel. Before we get into some of those details on rights and royalties, Kostas, can you talk a little bit about the marketing side? You know, the marketing world, obviously, scale is critical and efficiency is also critical. But, you know, having represented many marketing agencies and businesses over my career, I've always sort of been curious about the slowness of adoption in the industry, the lack of purchasing of intellectual property rights. It's sort of always been a people business, right? And you're talking about agents now, not people at all, right? So talk to me a little bit about sort of, you know, when an agency wants to buy another agency, they always think about people. When I've had agencies that have technology, they're like, we don't even know what to do with this technology. Talk about how they're adopting to this new landscape in terms of using these tools for scale and efficiency in the marketing world. Yeah,
so this is still relatively a very new technology, even though like OpenAI with GPT-3 has been around for almost 3 years now, and ChatGPT has been around for almost 6 months now. The majority of the marketers that we talk to, and we've talked to hundreds of agencies, are still in the process of educating themselves and slowly adopting this. Almost every marketer has heard of ChatGPT. I would say 1 in 2 marketers has tried it. Only 1 in 10 uses it like on a daily basis to really augment their workflow. And it's not because it's bad, although many have complained that they still have to heavily manually inspect and review and edit content. And it's kind of questionable to what degree do a lot of these models out of the box really save time. But it's a big problem of education that everyone has heard of it, but they're hesitant to really dip their feet. And if they dip their feet, it's like, okay, how do I exactly interact with the AI, let alone an agent that starts to automate a lot of the workflows? We're in the process of doing a lot of focus groups. And every time we saw a demo, everyone gets excited. And they said, now it makes sense now that you show it and you've explained it. But before you explained it, it was very foreign concept to us. So by end of the decade, I think every marketer, every content creator cannot exist without the use of AI to create content. It'll be the same way we use grammar checkers. We just can't live without a grammar checker anymore. But for now, it's still ramping up that slow adoption.
Do you see agencies and brands being different in that context in terms of your conversations? I mean, obviously, lots of brands have pulled in the agency function in-house over the past decade. Lots of them are experimenting with technology across their business. And when I've spent time with startups and retailers and in the world right now, they still think about sort of the infrastructure issues they're having over supply chain and pricing, you know, Web3 marketing, sort of technology still sometimes are on the back burner for some of those companies. Are they sort of reacting differently or all sort of similarly cautious?
They're all relatively cautious depending on their size. The freelancers, the startups, the small 2-3 person agencies, they're very fast to adopt this tech, especially if their teams are composed of like Gen Y or millennials. The bigger the agency, the bigger the company, the bigger the brand, it's a very slow adoption process. Like we still have an ongoing sales process with several enterprises 12 months in, and they've yet to fully agree as to what is the exact problem generative AI is solving for their brand, let alone, implementation. I think the concerns with bigger brands and agencies is, one, how do we roll it out in a way that it provides value to all of our employees? 2, how do we roll it out in a way that captures our brand voice, what makes us unique without any risks of like if going off topic and so forth. And in general, bigger companies, I think we all know here, are just very slow to adopt any new tech. Could take years before they fully adopt generative AI.
Interesting. Omar, are you finding from a scale and efficiency standpoint and in terms of challenge on the enterprise side, are you finding similar longer sales cycles and education, or is it easier in the sense that, you have assets being able to be dropped into sort of content that sort of exists and is a sort of a seamless integration, similar to what you see sometimes on television when you see sort of a trade-in sort of with a laptop or other things that can be seamlessly integrated without much story behind it. Like, obviously with social media and digital media, the scale can be pretty amazing in terms of what you're doing. But can you talk a little bit about the challenges you see on the enterprise side as well?
Yeah, we'll do. So, I mean, our North Star here is being very much like AdSense, which is, a campaign management system that, creators can interact with, influencers and brands can interact with without having to meet, without having to schedule a meeting. I spent a little time at Cisco running a group called Product-Led Growth and several products that were built that way. So I have a bias towards building products where no butts and seats have to get up for an incremental customer to come into the business. And the way that works with us here is that, anytime today, a bunch of influencers are logging onto our site, uploading a video that they've finished, and they haven't yet launched on YouTube or Instagram, they give it to us where we have a live campaign. We insert that product into the video. We return it to them some hours later. And the reason we say hours is because it's not just compute time. We have early in the days of AI, you want a human in the loop just to check the quality. And, that process takes a number of hours. It returns to them a finished video. They post it and it goes. They didn't have to talk to us. They didn't have to interact with us. It's all to the system. And the brand also can just launch a campaign with us. They don't have to talk to the influencer. And they're disrupting a world that today is super manual. You're talking about 2 years ahead of a movie you have to negotiate to get something into the script. And in the sponsored post week world, it's 4 to 6 weeks of back and forth. You ship the product, you negotiate. The influencer says, no way I'd say that. That doesn't sound natural. Give me more money, all that kind of stuff. So here we're trying to make it a campaign system, very much like AdSense, no human interaction, completely self-service. Now, the reality is we just launched in February. So even though we do have a website up and it is self-service, behind the scenes, there are still components where the brand will send us a creative and we'll be like, hey, that creative might not look great. You mind if we turn it into 3D to better match the kinds of themes that we have? And so there's still some areas where we're driving the self-service and automation up, but we're getting faster and faster and faster in the North Star's PLG. The only other thing I'll say about scale is that if you guys ever saw Lumascapes or, how they talk about the whole ad ecosystem, one of the things that they started talking about recently is that for the past 15 years, we've put billions of dollars into making advertising more efficient. So we've done programmatic, data targeting, DMPs, DSPs, and all that. Each of those like incremental ads adds, tens of percentage points, if even, to the efficiency of this massive business. And what that is like looking at an iceberg where you're only looking at what's above the water. And what they're realizing is that there's this whole 10x opportunity below the water and making ads effective. And that required manipulating the creative, which we couldn't do, so nobody did. But now with generative, you open up this whole world of AI allowing you to create creative that people are going to positively respond to, which really opens up the opportunity of changing how this industry works.
I mean, that to me makes a lot of sense in terms of, if you certainly have seen personalization and targeting at a new level, and I continue to see ads that I can't stand and content that I don't want to watch, right? And so that sort of leaves us to talk about sort of consumer adoption and authenticity and sort of relevancy. Jennifer, I'm going to sort of pass it to you to sort of talk through some of those issues, because, as much as we start to adopt these technologies, we get to talk about the fun stuff today, which is entertainment, advertising, and media content. There's got to be eyeballs and there's got to be interaction. And so how do we sort of think about that, I think is a really interesting topic to segue to.
Yeah, perfect setting up for us, Omar. So thank you. And great to see everybody here. Thank you to our panelists, and great to see all of you out there watching. It was nice to see a lot of familiar names. So talking about the customers, but from the perspective of the end consumers, as you were alluding to there, Omar, regulators are voicing opinions on AIGC, things like deep fakes, voice clones, etc. But one question I think is on many people's minds is whether or not consumers really care about the progeny of the content. For example, some might love the mashup of an AI generated song or enjoy a rich interaction with a chatbot in a game, like we heard Moritz talk about earlier. And then others are really going to care about authenticity. So thinking about the balance, maybe I'll start with you, Chris. We know that you give users the option to actually hide AI comics. So it would be lovely to hear about the thought process leading up to why you decided to include that option. Do you think about the fact that users viewing AI GC and human content may have a different reaction to what they're engaging with?
Thank you for bringing that up. You're actually one of the first ones to notice and comment to us directly about it. Since we put that out in November of last year. It's interesting when you say consumers, right? Because for us, the creators are also consumers. They read comics probably more than many of the hardcore folks that are following series. We kind of view this relationship between the creatives and the consumer on a spectrum, right? Like you have these buckets of consumers that are just hardcore binge consumers. They'll go through any amount of content as fast as they can, and all they care about is getting their daily, weekly, whatever fix. In conversations with some of them, they don't particularly care where it came from, as long as the story is good. And then as you traverse that spectrum towards fandom into the story itself or the creator or a particular brand, you start, as a consumer, you start becoming part of that community and you start developing a form of relationship with the people that are creating the stories. And those types of consumers very much do care about the authenticity, right? And they care about the I'm consuming or reading the story that someone took a lot of experience or effort or time or whatever it might be to crafting this narrative that's resonating with someone. And creators in particular, they at this time very much care about choosing where do they spend their time. And so we put the hide AI option out there simply so that people have the choice, right? Like sometimes the level of what is created or outputted from an AI can be so indistinguishable from what is created by a human that simply giving the consumers the choice seemed like the right thing to do. And it's also, we see the creators use that more when they go looking for inspiration or when they go on their weekly reading binges, etc. So really, it was just a function of how do we give people the right choices to decide how do they spend their time.
It's a really thoughtful approach because my personal view is the ability for the sophisticated interaction with the output will only increase and augment over time, as technology innovates, because that's what we've seen again and again. And acknowledging the integrity of the consumer choice is going to be very important from a experience perspective, and frankly, I think also from a regulator's perspective too. So, Omar, maybe we could go to you next. Your technology focuses on, realistic content versus novel creation. And for social media content, consumers often need to know from a legal perspective what they're seeing in an advertisement, whether it's an advertisement or not, whether it's editorial content or not. What do you think about the transparency principle for AI-generated product placement, for example? How do we think about those issues as we look forward to the prolific, I imagine, use of AIGC as you talked about earlier?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those areas that actually work to our advantage in a very interesting way. So there's an FTC requirement that if you're doing a video and it's sponsored, you need to disclose that. Now, this is not a verbal sponsorship where they swap the show and they talk about the product. It's a placement. So what we did is we went with a visual disclosure that's configurable. It'll show up for maybe, right when the product's about to show up on the screen, something will show up for like 10 seconds saying, this episode was brought to you by L'Oreal and so on. So we really leaned into that because it actually creates value both for the consumer, because they now know that someone paid for this, but it creates value for the brand, that the brand is willing to pay for, because they want you to see a message that says L'Oreal. So you remember L'Oreal, and maybe even you put a text in there, which is the core brand message that they wanted to communicate. So this is one area that just aligns everywhere. The creator had to do it. The FTC required it. The brand actually wants it. So we productized it. I think that works for all sides.
That's great. And it's interesting because it also perhaps will help us help companies think through how to make those disclosures. Sometimes getting some directions makes sense. And we know, even if we look at the terms of service for some of the AI tools, some terms are now contractually requiring users to disclose when they're using an AI solution generator, in order to just let people know. I think it's a great way to think about it in terms of kind of a win-win for everybody, as you described, based on the FTC requirements that already exist. So, Kostas, Bill Gates recently talked about how, eventually consumers will get everything from an AI agent. I know you talked about that a little earlier. What do you think? Do we agree? Are the humans going to be replaced?
Not this decade. And keep in mind that the tech evolves and moves so fast that one prediction today may be entirely false next year or even tomorrow. I did not think that like video generation, image generation, even agents would be here already, and they are here, and they're getting better and better every day. At that speed, I predict that will be very heavily augmented this decade. Every job that needs a computer will be augmented. Now, those are physical construction work and so forth. Those are very safe until the robots come from Tesla. But this decade, it's going to be a huge, almost disruption in every workflow, whether it's content creation or media creation, or even things in HR, accounting, even legal, what you guys do, will be augmented heavily. Now, what does that mean in terms of automation, in terms of laying off people? It's very hard to say. I think Goldman Sachs kind of nailed it, that in the next couple of years, we may see 30-40% of the workforce augmented, even maybe automated and replaced. IBM and BuzzFeed is already laying off hundreds and thousands of employees to replace them with assistants. Now, what's going to be really scary is that if your job is augmented, let's say the role of a data scientist who normally would make a $200,000 annual salary because you need very advanced skills, and in come the agents that, pennies on the dollar, can augment their job. They can 10x their output and do a lot of the things that they do. If they just need supervision, well, now what do we pay the data scientist? Do we need to pay him or her a huge salary anymore? And the answer may be no, because it's augmented to the point where we may even have interns or entry-level positions augmented with AI, doing a quality of work that a professional 10-year employee is doing. That will have huge implications to the labor force. Now, 10, 15 years into the future, then it gets very scary. I have a 1-year-old daughter. By the time she's in college, it's very frightening to think, okay, what does the world look like then? Because it's pretty realistic to think that any job that needs a computer may not exist in that time frame of 1 or 2 decades from now.
It's an interesting observation, and my mind goes to so many places. Part of my personal view is that with innovation comes opportunity, and so I think you're right that some roles will be replaced, and then the hope is that that will open up opportunity for new roles, perhaps ones we can't even conceive right now. I live here in San Francisco, and in my neighborhood, Waymo and cruise cars without any humans in them are very common. We see, hundreds of them every day driving around, some with passengers in them. So it really, we're really already visually seeing some of the manifestation of the fact that humans aren't needed for certain things. So it'll be very interesting to see where we wind up when your daughter's in college. Maybe she'll be studying for some kind of a course that we can't even conceive of right now. So switching gears for for a moment, thinking a bit about IP protection and regulation. This has been very newsworthy. And so I'm sure everybody has been paying attention to the AI generated headlines. I don't mean actually AI generated headlines, but headlines that were generated by this topic. The Castanova comic case, the guidelines we got from the Copyright Office, the Drake remix song that garnered some attention, and then a bunch of lawsuits that we're seeing. So Vejay and I would love to talk to you all a little about what you think from an IP perspective. So I'll start by perhaps asking you, Omar, what do you think about the rights protection in the context of the inputs and the outputs? And just as a reminder for the audience, under US law right now, at least, the position is that if output from an AI tool is created entirely by the tool, it doesn't have copyright protection. The copyright protection comes into play when there is human intervention, if you will.
Yeah, so this is a really important question. Having come from a business, before this, which is data targeting, these kinds of questions are existential risk questions that sometimes the industry ignores, and they develop bad habits, and then all of a sudden stuff happens, and all of a sudden the cookie starts crumbling and regulation starts coming in, and it has like massive impact. So they're kind of like black swan events that we need to pay attention to now and get right, and not wait till it's too late. So I'm glad you're bringing it up. In the case of something like what we do with product placement, we're essentially taking two assets that we have the rights to. The first one is the set coming from the influencer. So the influencer signs a contract and basically says, I'm giving you this to do something in return for me. And then the brand gives us an asset we turn into a 3D model. And then they basically say, I'm giving to you this for this limited use. So we're IP protected on both sides, and then we fuse them together. So in our case, we're a little bit safe. But even for players like us, when we're training the algorithms, we need more data than just what we've processed, obviously. So that has to be trained on assets that are correctly permissioned and where the rights are. And that's where I see the industry getting in a little bit more trouble, where they're swimming in this category where they think they can get away with it. And maybe they can for some period of time, but it's going to become trickier for us to really nail what we have rights to train on.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're seeing that with some of the lawsuits too out there, and some of the concerns that we hear from clients who are waiting for sort of enterprise versions or tools that are only trained on, let's say, public data or rights permission data. Chris, on the platform side, I'm sort of curious about how you're sort of impacted by this. I don't know if this is truly impacting you the same way as some other like platforms that have like tons of UGC on it, where the typical sort of takedown process is more complex for them right now than it used to be. For example, you saw sort of YouTube take a pretty long pause before it pulled down that AI Drake song, trying to understand whether or not truly there was an infringement there. But how are you seeing that from a platform perspective? How are you thinking about that? Rights, you mentioned earlier that rights are really important to your creators. Like, on the flip side, you also have to manage sort of the complaints that you might get from IP holders. Like, how does that process working for you? And have you given that thought about, we talked about AI taking away jobs, but like I could see a lot of jobs being created in terms of resources there. So.
Yeah, thank you. I think that when it comes to rights process and rights management and takedown, these types of things, our policy so far has been to kind of follow the normal rights takedown process with proving some form of sourcing or this thing of mine is being used in here. It's a very difficult question, right? Because it's very, very hard for us to kind of prove either way. When we think about comics that come into our platform, we require that creators disclose whether or not they've used generative AI solutions to generate either the story or the art or both. And as a preliminary approach for us, we've turned off monetization entirely for content that comes in having used AI, right? And so the basic premise that we kind of decided on was in our terms, it says that when you turn on monetization, you accept that you have the full rights in order to monetize this thing. And since we can't really prove that with AI and the creators can't really prove it with AI, we just took the option of, okay, well, it can be here for people to read for free, but you can't really make money off of that yet, right? And that might change as the sophistication of the tooling with attribution and with royalties and with credits and all these things come into play in the market. And certainly, you know, when we think about how could we give those tools to creators ourselves, that comes, you know, very high ranked on the needs before we could even deploy tooling like that. You know, moderation is interesting. We don't really proactively screen everything that's uploaded. There is an aspect of UGC on our platform, but we do have, you know, 15, 20 years of experience in community moderation and in UGC moderation collectively in our team. So the processes that we have in place are really kind of the reactive, but also active moderation on our own as we are curating on a regular basis. And so, you know, I don't really have a one-size-fits-all answer to you on this. It's a process that we are developing and one that we're making sure that we're involving our stakeholders and our creators and our publishers heavily in, so that we can make the right decisions for our community and for the creators and for the ecosystem at whole to flourish and grow.
One interesting observation I would have on the moderation piece, but this applies to some of the other legal issues too, given that we do have a couple of lawyers in the room at least, is that the existing legal framework we have still applies because we don't have right now any kind of robust AI or mature AI legal framework. There are certainly some embryonic laws out there, both here and in other places in the world. And content moderation is an interesting one because moderation tools exist, filtering tools exist and so on, because they have to, and those emerged when UGC was in its embryonic stage. And so some of those tools can be applied, as you said, Chris, in exactly the same way, because ultimately once the content exists, it exists and must be moderated in the same way that exists, as in it was created by an AI tool, must be moderated in the same way as if it was created by you or me or anyone else here. But I think that's a thoughtful approach, just to sort of keep the evolution of the thinking and of the business decisions as you kind of watch how things progress. Kostas, same question. What are you thinking about, or what do you worry about in the context of regulatory enforcement? We know that content can be produced by AI. It can also be conceived by AI. The idea for something, or conceiving something that had never existed before. How do you think about the potential risks there?
Well, there's risk that, the government can come down and start heavily regulating everything and say, you know what, we're going to start banning these tools or heavily limiting their usage, which is very difficult to detect in the first place, even if possible. And as an AI scientist, I can tell you it is very difficult, close to impossible to detect if the text or an image or even eventually videos can be detected because they're very bad right now, but they're getting professional quality very fast. That's a risk for every AI company, that the government at some point will come down and just heavily regulate everything. It is my personal belief that we should start having a dialogue in society that do we need to copyright material anymore? And I know it's a very controversial thing. It's like, well, we copyright material, whether it's a song or a video or a text or anything, because we worked hard at it and we want to monetize it. But in a world where AI can allow anyone to generate infinite content and infinite variations at professional quality, and even come up with new ideas, does it serve a purpose? Even if Drake made a new song and it's popular, you can make infinite variations of it. If we have laws saying, okay, well, you have to tweak it X amount percentage until it's different enough, people will do it. And they'll make infinite variations. The same way that consumers consume TikTok and YouTube and Instagram Reels with tons and tons of content that now made by influencers. The same thing may happen with AI, where we just sit here 5 years from now on our phones and just have infinite videos generated on the fly with whatever we want to see for our entertainment. So it becomes a very good question. Like, should we eliminate the role of copywriting altogether? I'm neither for or against it, but it's something we have to ask ourselves. What do we do in a world where AI can do it all, cheap if not for free?
It's an absolutely fair point. I think a controversial one for sure, and maybe there could be some kind of a dual system. It's something that's a little bit analogous to what we see in the open source world, where there's absolute support for making code or content available in a very permissive and very accessible way. While still appreciating the desire to allow agency in deciding whether or not to be permissive about some creative endeavor.
My 16-year-old said that was the best thing Drake put out in 5 years. So, I don't think Gen Z is going to care as much if it's good content or music. On some level, I think ultimately, if you think about human creativity as part of the output, I think ultimately you still will have lots of copyrightable works, and compilations and adaptations of things that use AI, but still can be copyrightable. But so I agree, there's probably going to be an element of change in the ecosystem that is certainly raising some concerns from rights holders. And then I think you're going to see solutions and technology solutions that speak to those concerns as well, to make sort of creators, as Chris mentioned, sort of feel more confident and comfortable in their ability to sort of harness their creativity. What I'm interested to hear kind of from all of you is sort of, both on the legal side, kind of what keeps you up right now, but also sort of on the development side, how are you thinking about development in that context, right? If you're thinking about the fact that things may change that rapidly, what are you doing from a development perspective to sort of proactively sort of, bulletproof or sort of innovate your business in a way that it will have longevity? Kostas, maybe you could start, because I know you're sort of thinking about this in terms of AI building upon AI. It would be interesting to hear more about sort of like, what outside of your 1-year-old daughter not having a professional coding job. Similar to me, my 16-year-old son probably shouldn't go to law school anymore, even though he's a great writer. But like, what's keeping you up at night from a business perspective? Like, what are you thinking about? What are some of the development side tactics that you're using on that side?
I wouldn't say that I'm really worried about anything other than maybe the government coming down and saying, we're just going to straight up ban this technology. And quite the contrary, I'm not only thrilled, but I'm hoping people will step on the gas pedal to move even faster with this tech, that while there are many, many risks with it, the upsides of agents automating tasks or augmenting workflows, creating infinite content for marketing or entertainment or any other field, is the benefits we're going to get. The economic benefits are just exponential. For us to survive now and in the future, it's extreme constant innovation, which is why we're comprised a lot of many AI scientists, where we're constantly thinking, where is this heading? And let's continue to evolve. This is a very rare technology, moment in history with AI, that it's not going to stop. and it'll keep getting more creative. Like last year, we thought, okay, text is here. Then images came, then music is coming, and now video is coming. Now agents are coming. We don't know where it's going to stop. So it needs constant innovation, and you have to always be on top of it to see where is it going and where's it going to go next year, the year after, and try to leap there before your competition, really.
Omar, Chris, any thoughts as well?
I mean, just in a world where things are moving so fast, I think when you're building a company or an innovation, you have to think more of surfing than sculpting. I use this analogy a lot, which is that sometimes people think about building an innovation as a sculpting process. You see in your mind's eye what the output is, and then you just etch away everything in the rock that isn't the sculpture you wanted, kind of rephrasing from what people have seen from great artists. Whereas surfing basically says, no, you're really good at sensing the wave. You do not create the wave. You know how to ride the wave artfully, and you're just super good at sensing it and riding it in the right way. And that's the mentality you need in this super fast changing environment, where you have to be strategic about where you're going, but you also have to be very closely sensing the way things are moving so you stay ahead of it and ride it.
I think Omar is hitting spot on there. I tend to view it from a perspective of how do we deliver value? And when it comes to what products and what innovation do we focus on, there's many different approaches you could do to that. You could take a Kaizen approach, and so you take the biggest discrepancy and then the next biggest discrepancy and all these, that type of approach, which works very well for incremental and potentially like somewhat bigger pieces of innovation, but doesn't really touch on the dramatically shifting parts. So the way that we kind of go about it is it's about a 50-50, right? Like roughly, in that we will develop resources and make sure that we have resources for the process optimization, for the reduction of time spent, for the making things easier, for the things making things more powerful, as well as on the side of enabling things that couldn't be done before by potentially individuals, right? Like the comics medium itself lends itself very well into artistic animation. And so we think about that for our creators, and there's a whole wide range of types of products that they could benefit from, right? Like everything from automated marketing videos all the way through to prototype animation storytelling. And it's not really a keeping us up at night from a legal perspective as much as it is how can we make sure that the long tail of creatives have an on-ramp into this technology so that they don't get left behind. And that's really where the, oh my God, how do we solve for question keeping us up really comes into play.
So thank you for those great responses. One place we just want to go before we wrap is to get your viewpoints on how to think about avoiding non-biased outcomes. Clearly, I think for all of the three panelists we have here, you have a very thoughtful, sophisticated approach to the use of AI GC tools, but it is a very important consideration for anybody using these tools. So, Kostas, maybe we'll start with you, our data scientist. We read a lot about the concern about fairness and the machine learning the incorrect thing, if you will, and so on. So how do you think about and what advice or thoughts might you have on how to think about ensuring non-biased outcomes for use of the AI? And then I'll pose the same question to Omar and Chris.
Well, since we are building a lot of this AI, and then we do have dedicated teams to looking at like toxicity and bias and like, is it going to be sexual, not safe for work, things like that. We do think there's a floor for this. Like definitely you cannot be racist or xenophobic or sexist in the content that the AI is creating. So we're building content filters similar to the way OpenAI built theirs. But at the same time, we do believe that after that threshold, it's a very much a debate, like where exactly do you put the threshold? It may change next year depending on what the social norms are. We do think that a lot of the risk does fall on the businesses and even the consumer who use the tech to say that, yes, this is AI, so we have to be clear that you're using AI tech. And you have to be clear that the AI may produce things that are sometimes false or sometimes may offend you. I mean, we cannot create an AI that won't offend anyone on the planet. Someone will be offended somewhere with the images or the videos or the music it creates. So the best we can do is high quality floor that meets the basic social norms of society, and then kind of pass on the responsibility or the liability to the businesses that use it, and warn the consumers that, hey, look, this is not perfect. Even human content by human creators is not perfect.
Yeah. And I think that that's an important point. Understanding the floor is crucial, but what one person might find funny, another person might find offensive, and that's an important distinction. Omar, I'll pose the same question to you.
Yeah, so on the one hand, I think some of our job is a little bit easier because we're not doing novel generation of video. We want everything to look like it was filmed in the scene, so it's photorealistic. So we built something called, basically physics-informed generative, and the idea is we're building the laws of like light, motion, reflectivity of surfaces, occlusion into the networks, precisely so we don't get novelty. And so we have a little bit less of those issues that you'd get. But reflecting on previous life, I do think the problem is that when we're relying on labeled data that comes from a certain cultural perspective, even when you just filter out a floor, you still have a very strong bias in what went into the training. And so I do like techniques that use data science to identify that females are underrepresented in the voice set that went into the training, or certain age groups or certain cultures and accents, so that you can adjust how much data gets mixed in. I think techniques like that are important, as opposed to if you just do a floor, then you have so many biases in everything that goes above the floor. I think we need better techniques there. And I think there are some techniques out there.
Thank you. Chris?
I have a 2.5-year-old, and I tend to think about training these algorithms or training these models in the same way that I'm training my boy, right? Like when he first was born, he didn't have any idea how to move his hands or legs, and then he did 100,000 movements, and then suddenly he could move his legs, right? I think the idea of bias is inherently very, very, very difficult to escape. And it's because it's just such a prevalent part of our lives, right? Like we have these preconceptions that we've grown up with, that we were born with, that we were taught from our parents, from school, from our particular culture, where we are in the world, even all the way down to what language you speak and what words are available for you to express yourself, right? And so the way that we tend to think about biased outcomes is how much diversification can we do on the input in the first place, right? Like making sure that when we're speaking with creatives, they're from all over the world, right? And they have very different perspectives and very different angles that they approach a lot of their thinking, right? Like folks from Germany might have a very different way of thinking than folks from Japan, for example, when it comes to use of the technology. And so I don't know that we can 100% always eliminate biases, but I think the first step is really being cognizant of what all are the things that we are biased about in the first place, and how does that work? And then construct a system around to filter in as many different kinds of input with a high quality signifier into that process. And then hopefully, you get a project or product or a model that can go from a 3-year-old to an 18-year-old and come out okay on the other side.
I love the way you described it, because it's a way I've thought about it too. You know, we're teaching a machine, we're teaching our kids or a small person to function in a world that we've created, in a world that is changing. And in many ways, I have teenage sons, you know, who we talk in our family a lot about when will the machines be sentient, and some of them already are. And we have awesome dinner discussions about things like that. But there's a social responsibility which exists, I think, in general, and layering that over to what we're doing for machine learning is really key. Kostas?
Yeah, a quick note, because I love what you said, Chris, that yes, we need to mitigate some bias, but different parts of the world have different social norms. And I think like what we're trying to do ourselves, and where I see AI going, is ultimately the user will have AIs, like the agents that learn from their habits, their beliefs. Now, I don't know if this will be a good or a bad thing where every AI adapts to the user and to their biases. So maybe my daughter will have an AI that you know, treats everyone equal, and maybe someone in India will have AI that is very biased towards certain cultural norms, because that's the way they want it to be. Is this a society we want to live in? I leave it up to the government or to people to decide. But I think that as a company, you know, we have some maybe universal social norms we adhere to, and then really give it to the consumer to decide for themselves how to teach the AI, what do they want to see. I just want to point that out.
I mean, it's funny, we've all talked about our kids, and mine's about to drive a machine, which is a car, and I'm terrified of that. But sort of wrapping this up, you know, I think, you know, when the FTC and the regulators talked about it, they've actually quoted Jurassic Park. So hopefully that's not where we're headed. But we're certainly headed into a new world that you know, we're lucky to have folks like you, at least in the fun part of this world with entertainment media, that can really speak to these issues so thoughtfully, and helpfully to our clients and community that we've had here today. So just wanted to thank each of you for taking the time to do that. I thought this was a really, really incredible conversation. And thanks to our audience for staying with us for the hour and a half. And, you know, hopefully this is just the beginning of these conversations in the Fenwick community and elsewhere. And we'll hopefully have you back at some point, and you can tell us what you've built and what you've changed, and how technology has changed what you were thinking about building. So with that, I'm sort of going to wrap it up and say thank you. Really, really appreciate each of you and Jennifer for co-moderating this with me.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.